Topping the news this hour, something that's catching the attention of numerous outlets today. Dead people have won elections in the past, so could felons be next? In West Virginia, Democrats have anything to say about it? The answer may be yes. Take a look at these headlines. They pretty much tell it all. Texas inmate wins 41% of the votes versus Obama in West Virginia primary. Obama loses to felon in several West Virginia counties, and 4 out of 10 choose convict over Obama in West Virginia primary. Against Obama, even a jailbird gets some votes, and why felon Keith Judd did so well against Obama in the West Virginia primary. That's right, folks. The man you're looking at right now, a man named Keith Judd, is actually giving the president a run for his money. Judd is currently serving a 17-and-a-half-year prison sentence at a federal correctional institution that isn't even in West Virginia for making threats at the University of New Mexico in 1999. For many of the people who voted against the president in this primary, it wasn't even about getting a felon elected. It was about sending a message to the president that they're willing to take almost anyone over him and that he better shape up or ship out. Let's take a look at the breakdown for these votes for the Democratic primary. President Obama won 59% of the vote, while Judd took a whopping 41% of last night's primary. That's enough to earn him multiple delegates to the Democratic National Convention. But no one has registered to be a Judd delegate yet. West Virginia is a Democratic state, but its voters voted against Obama in his protest of coal policy, which they feel impedes the industry's growth in the state. But West Virginians aren't the only ones unhappy with the Obama administration's policies. Students leaving academia in this country are being left in the lurch with a ball and chain of debt that will follow them for life. A couple weeks ago marked one T-Day where student debt hit the $1 trillion mark. Let's take a look at some of these stats. Currently, $67 billion of student loans are in default, and the Education Department has 23 private debt collectors chasing the borrowers. So with this much debt hanging over the heads of students, how could those entering the workplace be expected to get ever back on their feet? Pamela Brown is a PhD student at New School for Social Research and an activist with the Occupy Student Debt Campaign. She joins me now to tell me more about what the Occupy movement is doing about all this debt. Pamela, thanks for joining us. You know, there has been some controversy about the methods that the Occupy movement is using, taking foreclosed homes, and now some are suggesting taking university buildings and even refusing to pay debt. Are these methods feasible, and tell me more about them?
Well, in terms of our campaign, which is the Occupy Student Debt Campaign, we have a pledge of refusal, which basically collectivizes 1 million people toward the following goals. 1, interest-free student loans if they continue to exist. 2, a public education system that is free. 3, private institutions opening up their books and showing us where they actually spend the money. And 4, a write-off of the current student debt because it was obtained through predatory lending practices and is therefore not legitimate debt in the first place. So we do have a pledge of refusal. We think that it's absolutely viable, and we are ready and waiting for people to sign en masse to gain 1 million pledgers. And we think that that moment is going to come soon because the crisis is unsustainable. As of course you know, there's already only 58% of college graduates over 25 currently have student loans, and only 37% of student loan debt is actually paid consistently from the start through the end. So with numbers like that, we know it's unsustainable and that something absolutely has to be done.
Pamela, if a bunch of Ivy League kids going to these expensive universities just aren't able to pay their debt, why should we take the burden as taxpayers and absolve this $6 billion burden, or even just the entire debt crisis like you're talking about? Well,
one of the misperceptions is that you're just dealing with a bunch of Ivy Leaguers who overpaid for their education. But we've been telling people for many years that college is an invaluable experience, that they're going to make far more money by going to college, and we have a system which does place greater weight perhaps on private and Ivy League schools. So we can't really fault someone for seeking out what they believe the best education possible would be. Now, to the second part of your question, I actually am not sure of who would end up taking on this burden. The assumption is that it would be the government, but the government has a lot of powers and can absolutely pressure the banks, who are the ones making the money, who have securitized this debt and profited by it and continue to profit enormously through their collection practices, through their predatory lending practices, through the amount of interest that tends to accrue over time. So it's not a given who would end up paying in the event that there would be a collective strategy for refusal, or what could be worked out.
Pamela, with the government giving billions in commissions to these predatory student loan industries, I mean, even if the campaign does get enough backing to petition the government to expunge these debts, how can the government do that when they're so invested in the industry?
Right. Well, in so many other cases where we've seen whole countries have unsustainable debt loads, we've seen things change when people started to say, we're not going to pay this. Or countries started to pay that in terms of the IMF and situations like that. So I'm not sure exactly what the resolution would be, but we know that there absolutely has to be a resolution.
Let's talk about the battle on the Hill right now about freezing these interest rates. What do you think the solution is with that? We have the Republicans wanting to pull from Obama's health care to pay for it, to keep them frozen, and then you have the Democrats wanting to pull from businesses. I mean, what do you think should happen?
Well, first of all, I mean, the 3.4% interest rate hold should definitely happen one way or another. Of course, the money should come from the so-called 1% in the forms of taxes, in the form of removal of tax loopholes, whatever form that would be. That would be the best solution. But we have to really understand that this is also somewhat of a distraction. We have a total over the entire life of the loan of about $1,000 per borrower that we're talking about. And we're only talking about college loans that go to college students, which are subsidized. We're not talking about the vast majority of student loans or what's already on the books. So this is going to only affect new borrowers. It's not going to affect people who already have student loan debts that they cannot pay. $1,000 over the course of a loan, if we're talking about 10 years, which would be a very short period for someone to pay off their student loan bill, we're talking about $100 a year, which is going to be less than $10 a month, which amounts to a couple of extra Starbucks coffees or something really, really small. We're not talking about something that's really significant at all. And I do think that it's kind of sad that we are in a political situation right now where we have the president needing to traverse the entire country, drumming up support for something that is not even a solution to the problem that we collectively face within the entirety of American society right now.
Let's talk about the problem as a whole. A lot of people are detached from the student loan crisis because they're out of that age bracket, or they haven't gone to school for a long time. They've already paid off their debts. So they're looking at this crisis like, well, why would it affect me? Why should I care? Talk a little bit about how, if the bubble does burst, what would that do to the economy?
Well, it's not clear what would happen to the economy if the so-called bubble burst, because, of course, as you sort of alluded to before, we already have a pre-bailout, basically, a guarantee from the government to bail out something approximately 98% of each of the government loans. So it's not necessarily going to occur in exactly the way that the real estate bubble happened, which was with a big explosion and a meltdown of the financial markets. This is a much more subtle kind of an experience that the entirety of the middle class is going to feel, and it's likely to create situations where we've seen in other countries when neoliberal policies have been aggressively put forth, such as what we've had here since the 70s now. We've ended up with high poverty rates. Why has that been? Why have poverty rates gone up in those countries up to something like 40%? one of the reasons behind that is that people just increasingly have gone further and further into debt. If you're in debt already, you can't secure money to do things to improve your life, like buy a car, for example, if you need to travel to get to a better job, or buy a home. And when we're dealing with depressed real estate market prices already, and we have a generation of people who are not going to be able to buy their first house, what will happen to the generation of people when they are aging in our society and they need to sell the house that they've lived in for 30 years? But the buyer won't be there.
So the consequences are really unseen, and they really can't be seen until this explodes. And there's so many different things linking up to this crisis that it really is hard to tell. Pamela, expand about the new strategy for the Occupy Student Debt campaign. What's coming up, and what are you guys planning?
Mm-hmm. Well, we just, as you mentioned before, we just finished with One Tea Day, which was an enormous success. We had a lot of media attention around drawing attention to the fact that we've crossed the $1 trillion mark. And right now we are working to ask people to sign our pledge of refusal. You are not obligated to go forward if you sign the pledge, but we would like you to take it seriously and to consider when you do what the personal consequences might be to you. So the website for that is occupystudentdebtcampaign.org. And even if you don't have student loan debt, you can sign a pledge of support saying that this situation is unsustainable. So we are working on getting signatories onto the pledge because we believe 100% that we will have to take a much stronger stand than getting petitions signed, and some of these bills, which while they would be helpful certainly, would not solve the problem, which are in Congress right now.
Pamela, do you agree with the strategies that are a little bit more radical about occupying actual facilities on campus to try to shed light to the crisis?
There have been several campus occupations, and I think that various groups should do whatever they think would be most effective within their local communities. If it's within your college community, decide collectively what would be most effective in terms of asking for change at that location.
What about the administrators on campus who are put out for the day, or do you think that that would piss people off at all, that they're not able to go to their jobs, or the students not able to go to class? I mean, do you think that might have a backfire effect on the movement?
Well, that's hard to predict. Hopefully people will realize that the entirety of our society is being inconvenienced by $1 trillion worth of unsustainable debt load. And really this is really a generational justice issue at this point. So we have a generation of people who are not just inconvenienced, but they're shackled in debt. They're about to go into lives of basically indentured servitude, working 20 years to pay off debts that they may never be able to pay. So I would hope that anyone who's inconvenienced by any actions would take that into consideration.
Thanks, Pamela. That was Pamela Brown, PhD student at the New School for Social Research and an activist for the Occupy Student Debt campaign.